The wooden door creaks open, releasing the warm scent of roasting meat, fresh-baked bread, and aged rum. The low murmur of voices, punctuated by bursts of laughter, mingles with the gentle clink of mugs on oak tables. Outside, the dusty road of a bustling colonial town winds past the tavern's weathered porch, where weary travelers tie up their horses and prepare to step inside. In an age when inns were rare and news traveled by word of mouth, the tavern was more than a place to drink. It was the heart of the community. Today, we'll follow the tavern keeper from dawn to midnight, through the aromas, the chatter, and the quiet moments that made this place the soul of colonial life. The day begins long before the first guest stirs. The tavern stands quiet in the pale blue light, just before sunrise, its clapboard walls damp with the night's dew. Inside, the air is still cool, holding the faint scent of last night's fire. A few embers remain in the wide hearth, glowing faintly, as if reluctant to let go of their warmth. The tavern keeper wakes in the small room upstairs, the wooden floorboards creaking softly beneath his feet as he dresses in the dim light. His clothes are practical: woolen breeches, a linen shirt, and a waistcoat that smells faintly of smoke and yeast. Before he even descends the stairs, he pauses to listen. All is still, no footsteps, no voices. Just the quiet hum of the building itself, settling into the new day. Downstairs, the first task is to coax life back into the fire. He kneels, stacking split logs over the embers, breathing gently to rouse them into flame. The hearth is the heart of the tavern, not only for thaw, warmth, but for cooking, and it must be ready before the morning is fully awake. Soon, the wood catches and orange light dances against the blackened stones. From there, he steps out into the morning air. The village street is empty, save for a stray dog trotting along the ditch. The tavern's sign, a wooden board painted with a tankard, swings gently from its iron bracket, creaking with the breeze. The tavern keeper makes his way to the well, bucket in hand. The rope scratches against the wood as it unwinds, the bucket splashing into the cold water below. When he hauls it up, the handle bites into his palm, and droplets spill onto the packed earth at his feet. Back inside, the bucket is placed near the hearth for the cook to use once the morning's work begins. The tavern smells of wood smoke now, mingled with the faint saltiness of the pork stored in the kitchen. He checks the stables next. The horses belonging to overnight guests shift and snort, their breath rising in the cool air. A handful of oats in the trough, a fresh bucket of water. These simple tasks ensure that the travelers will find their animals well cared for. By the time he returns inside, the first streaks of gold are touching the upper windows. The tavern's benches and tables still bear the marks of the night before. A forgotten clay pipe, a playing card left under a tankard, a scattering of crumbs. Soon enough, the quiet will give way to boots on the floorboards, mugs on the counter, and a chorus of voices. But for now, the tavern keeper allows himself a moment at the window, watching the day open its eyes. The first real stirrings of life in the tavern begin not with the guests, but with the kitchen. By the time the sun lifts above the rooftops of the town, the tavern keeper is already in the back room, sleeves rolled up, setting the day in motion. The cook, a sturdy woman with strong arms and a quick smile, arrives carrying a bundle of kindling under one arm and a small cloth sack of cornmeal in the other. She moves with the practiced ease of someone who has repeated these steps thousands of times, laying the kindling in the hearth-side oven, swinging the iron pot over flames, measuring out the cornmeal for a fresh batch of bread and porridge. The scent of cooking fills the tavern slowly, seeping out from the kitchen into the main room. Cornbread will be baked in the heavy cast-iron pan, its edges crisping to a golden brown, while a thick porridge bubbles in another pot, sweetened with molasses and sprinkled with dried berries from the last harvest. From the last harvest, from pantry, the tavern keeper brings out a slab of salted pork, cutting it into slices to fry. The meat sizzles loudly, sending curls of savory steam into the air. While breakfast cooks, the tavern keeper checks on the upstairs rooms. Each one holds the simple comforts a traveler expects: a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a blanket of wool, and a small table with a basin for washing. The floors are swept clean, the shutters are pushed open to let in the fresh morning air, and the faint scent of lye soap still lingers from the linens washed the day before. In the stables, the stable boy hums to himself as he runs a brush over the flank of a dappled mare. The sound of hooves shifting on the straw floor drifts in through the open back door of the tavern. Horses are fed and watered before their riders rise. Good service means not just feeding the guest, but also caring for their means of travel. By now, the kitchen is alive with motion. The cook kneads dough for the day's bread, folding and pressing it with steady, sure movements. A large kettle of cider hangs above the fire, the sweet, spiced scent promising warmth for those who wish to start their day with something more gentle than ale. The tavern keeper slices cheese, arranges it with small loaves of yesterday's bread, and sets out earthenware mugs in neat rows along the counter. The first guests to appear are usually the traders. They rise early, needing to be on the road before the day grows too hot or before a shipment is expected in town. Boots thud lightly on the staircase as they make their way down, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The tavern keeper greets each with a nod, offering a steaming mug of cider or, for those who prefer it, a strong coffee brewed from beans that arrived only last week from the West Indies. The sound of quiet conversation fills the air, news of road conditions, the latest price for tobacco, rumors of unrest farther north. The tavern keeper listens without seeming to pry, catching fragments of stories that will make their way into evening conversations. Outside, a cart rattles past, and a boy calls out the day's offerings from the bakery across the street. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, followed by the sharper sound of an axe striking wood from the cooper's yard nearby. The tavern's door swings open for the first time that morning as a local farmer enters, hat in hand, to ask if the tavern can set aside a table for his family later that afternoon. More guests drift down from the upstairs rooms, some dressed for travel, others content to linger over their meal. The cook brings out platters of cornbread, slices of pork, and steaming bowls of porridge, placing them in the center of the tables for everyone to share. The tavern keeper moves quietly among them, refilling mugs, fetching more butter, adjusting the position of a candle so its light falls where someone is reading a folded letter. These early hours are busy, but they carry a different pace than the rush to come. There's no loud laughter yet, no fiddler in the corner, no clattering of tankards over a heated debate. Instead, there's the steady rhythm of the day beginning, the scrape of a chair against the floor, the hiss of steam from a kettle, the gentle clink of a spoon in a mug. By mid-morning, the tavern keeper has checked the ledger, made note of which rooms will need changing after guests depart, and prepared coins for the stable boy's errands. Breakfast winds down, but preparations for the midday meal have already begun. The cook stirs a pot of stew, thick with root vegetables and the last of the venison brought in by a hunter 2 days ago. The scent of baking bread drifts through the open window, mingling with the earthy smell of the street outside. The day is now fully awake, and the tavern, its rooms, its kitchen, its stables, is ready to greet whatever travelers may arrive. Late morning brings with it the first stirrings of the road. The sun has risen high enough to warm the dust on the street outside, and a faint shimmer of heat begins to rise from the packed earth. The tavern's porch, shaded by its sloping roof, offers a welcome pause for anyone approaching from the open countryside. The sound comes first, a slow, steady rhythm of hooves on dirt. From behind the tavern's open door, the tavern keeper hears it. Faint at first, a wagon rattles in the distance, its wooden wheels thumping softly over uneven patches in the road. Now and then, the ring of a horseshoe striking a stone sends a sharp echo down the street. The tavern keeper steps onto the porch, one hand resting on the weathered railing. He sees them before they reach the building, a pair of riders in broad-brimmed hats, dust clinging to their coats, their horses showing the sheen of a long morning's travel. Behind them, the wagon follows at a slower pace, pulled by a stout bay mare. The driver tips his hat as he passes the cooper's shop, guiding his load toward the tavern yard. When travelers arrive, the first order of business is not food or drink, but care for their animals. The stable boy is already there, leading the riders' horses toward the shaded stalls, speaking to them in a low, reassuring voice. The wagon is backed against the fence, so the driver can unload a few barrels, supplies bound for merchants in the town perhaps, or goods to be traded at the market. Inside, the tavern keeper gestures toward the long table near the hearth. The travelers step in from the brightness of the street, blinking at the cooler, shadowed room. The air is scented with the last of the breakfast bread and the faint, sweet spice of cider still keeping warm in the kettle. Dust drifts from their coats as they remove them, folding them over the backs of chairs. At the counter, the tavern keeper opens the leather-bound ledger. The pages are thick, inked with neat rows of names, dates, and notes about each stay. With a quill in hand, he records the new arrivals, their names, the number of nights they plan to stay, and any special requests. Sometimes it is an extra blanket or a pitcher of water left by the bedside. Other times it is simply a promise that the horses will be ready to ride at first light. One of the riders, a tall man with weathered skin and a calm demeanor, orders a mug of ale despite the early hour. His companion prefers a mug of steaming coffee, his hands cupping it gratefully. The wagon driver, settling at the far end of the table, asks after a bowl of stew if it's ready, his voice hopeful. Though it's not yet midday, the cook sends out a small plate of bread and cheese to keep him until the main meal is served. As they eat and drink, the travelers talk, their voices carrying across the room in low tones. They speak of the road from the south, of a ferry crossing delayed by high water, of a small village they passed, where a barn roof had collapsed under the weight of the winter's last snow. The tavern keeper listens as he works, his ear catching these scraps of news. In a time when printed broadsheets might take weeks to arrive from the city, the tales of travelers are as good as any newspaper. Outside, more movement stirs. A young couple on foot approaches, each carrying a small bundle tied with twine. Their boots are worn, and they walk with the steady determination of those used to long distances. They stop at the porch, glancing through the open door, and the tavern keeper greets them with the same warmth as he would a wealthy merchant. A place by the fire, he knows, is valued equally by all who have walked a dusty road. The tavern begins to fill, not with the loud clamour of evening, but with the low hum of voices, the scrape of chairs, and the occasional burst of laughter from someone. Recounting a mishap along the road, the cook passes through with a tray of mugs, placing them before the travellers with a quiet word. The clink of coins on the counter marks the small exchanges of the morning, a night's lodging paid in advance, or a simple breakfast settled before departure. The door opens again, this time admitting a man in a merchant's coat, carrying a small satchel of papers. He pauses just inside, scanning the room, before greeting another man already seated near the back. The two shake hands firmly, leaning in to speak over the table. Though it is too early for the full bustle of trade, the tavern is already serving one of its many roles, as a place where business and travel meet. From time to time, the tavern keeper steps outside to check on the yard. The horses stand quietly in their stalls, tails flicking lazily, their saddles resting on the rack. The wagon has been unloaded, its barrels stored in the shade, ready for collection. Across the street, the blacksmith's hammer rings out, a rhythmic counterpoint to the quieter sounds of the tavern. By the time the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, the arrivals have slowed. Those who came in early are settled, some upstairs in their rooms, some lingering over their mugs, and some stepping out again to see to errands in town. The tavern keeper takes a moment to close the ledger, setting it aside for now. The morning's work has brought the first wave of the day, and soon the midday meal will bring in the next. By midday, the tavern is alive in a way that morning never is. The air is warmer now, carrying with it the mingled scents of stew simmering in the hearth pot, bread fresh from the oven, and the faint yeasty tang of ale being drawn from the keg. Sunlight streams in through the front windows, catching on the motes of dust that drift lazily in the air. The shadows in the corners are softer, and the polished wood of the long tables glows with a warm sheen. The tavern keeper moves with practiced ease between the kitchen and the main room. He checks that every table has enough bread set out, slices a round of cheese, and makes sure the mugs are lined up on the counter. The cook brings out the first pot of stew, thick with carrots, onions, and chunks of venison, the surface shimmering with heat. The smell alone is enough to draw customers from the street, and they come, as they always do at midday. Farmers from the outlying fields, their hands still rough with the morning's work, tradesmen from the shops nearby, the cobbler with his leather apron still dusted with shavings, the miller with the faint scent of flour in his clothes. A pair of soldiers in uniform, their muskets propped carefully near the door. Merchants who had been meeting quietly over papers now call for mugs of ale, relaxing their shoulders as the day's business pauses for a meal. The room fills with voices. The talk is of crops and prices, of shipments expected and delays endured. One man tells of his journey along the post road, where a bridge had been washed out and travelers had to ford the stream on foot. Another speaks of rumors from Boston, new taxes being discussed, and the growing unrest in the city. The soldiers listen, neither confirming nor denying, their faces unreadable. The tavern keeper hears it all. He does not press for details. Such talk can be sensitive, but he files away each story, knowing it may be repeated later to someone else who asks. A tavern, after all, is as much a place of news as it is of food and drink. In one corner, two older men play a quiet game of draughts. Their checkers are carved from bits of wood, worn smooth by years of use. They move their pieces slowly, pausing now and again to comment on the conversation around them. At another table, a fiddler has taken out his instrument and begun to play. Softly at first, just enough to give the room a gentle undercurrent of music. The notes are simple, familiar tunes that most in the room know by heart. The tavern keeper pauses behind the counter to draw more ale. The keg creaks slightly as the wooden spigot is turned, the amber liquid filling the mug with a frothy head. Across the room, the cook is delivering fresh bread, its crust crisp and golden, steam still rising from the torn edges. Butter, softened near the fire, is set out beside it. For a brief time, the room is nothing but warmth and comfort, people leaning toward one another, laughter breaking out in short bursts, the clink of spoons in bowls and mugs on wood. Outside, the sun is high, the road busy with wagons and pedestrians, but here inside, the pace is unhurried. The tales being told grow bolder as the meal goes on. A fisherman describes a catch so large that his boat nearly tipped. A trader recounts a night spent in a remote inn where the roof leaked in 4 places, forcing him to sleep beneath his cart instead. The laughter at this last story is loud enough to make the fiddler smile mid-tune. From time to time, the tavern keeper moves to the door, propping it open to let in a fresh breeze. The scent of the street, dust, leather, and the faint sharpness of the blacksmith's forge mixes with the richer aromas inside. A boy selling apples passes by, calling his price in a sing-song voice. The tavern keeper buys a small basket, setting it on the counter for guests to take from freely. As the meal begins to wind down, some of the patrons rise, leaving coins on the table. The soldiers collect their muskets and step outside into the bright light. Farmers linger a little longer, finishing the last of their bread. The fiddler sets his instrument aside, rubbing his fingers to ease the stiffness. By early afternoon, the room has quieted again. The bowls and mugs are gathered up, the tables wiped clean, and the pot of stew is moved to the side of the hearth to keep warm for anyone who comes later. The tavern keeper takes a moment to stand in the doorway, watching the street. More travelers will arrive before evening, bringing new stories and new business. For now, the tavern rests in that brief pause between rushes, a moment of calm before the day moves on. The midday crowd drifts away in slow trickles, leaving behind the soft echo of their voices and the faint aroma of bread and stew. Chairs are pushed in, crumbs brushed from the tables, and the fiddler's tune lingers in memory as he steps out into the sunlit street. It is in this quieter hour, when the tavern's main room is only half filled, that business takes its turn at the forefront. The tavern has always been more than a place to eat and drink. It is an unofficial meeting hall for merchants, tradesmen, and anyone with goods to buy or sell. Its long tables and discreet corners make it the perfect setting for conversation that needs both comfort and privacy. At the far end of the room, 2 merchants lean in over a spread of parchment. One wears a neatly brushed coat of deep brown, a sign of moderate prosperity, and keeps a small inkwell at his side, ready to note any change in agreement. The other, broader in frame and dressed in a more weather-worn jacket, has a voice that rumbles low as he talks through his offer. Between them, the table is dotted with signs of their trade, samples of cloth, a small pouch of coins, and a ledger filled with neat columns of numbers. The tavern keeper, though busy with his tasks, moves quietly near enough to refill their mugs without interrupting. he is careful not to disturb their discussion. Merchants prefer a host who is attentive without being intrusive, someone who keeps the fire warm and the drinks full but leaves their words untouched. At another table, a group of 3 men are deep in talk about shipping schedules. A small map lies unrolled before them, held flat by a pair of pewter mugs. They trace the river routes with their fingers, discussing where to send goods before the season's weather turns unpredictable. Every so often, one of them glances toward the door, as if expecting another party to join them. In the kitchen, the cook prepares a simple plate of bread, cheese, and pickled vegetables to send out for the men who have been talking since before noon. The tavern keeper delivers it himself, setting it down with a quiet word and stepping away without lingering. Such gestures, small as they are, earn him the trust of his patrons. Merchants who value discretion will always remember where they felt most at ease. The light outside has shifted slightly now, the angle of the sun casting long beams across the floor. Dust motes swirl in the glow near the front windows, and the low creak of the tavern's sign can be heard each time a breeze stirs. Beyond the door, the street remains busy, wheels rumbling over dirt, boots striking in steady rhythm. But inside, the pace remains measured and steady. Near the hearth, a lone trader sits with a sealed crate beside his chair. The crate bears markings from the West Indies, its faint scent of spice giving away its contents even before it is opened. He sips slowly from a mug of cider, occasionally, making notes in a small leather-bound book. A man approaches, hat in hand, and after a brief exchange, they sit together, speaking in low tones. It is clear that a sale is being arranged, quiet, direct, and without the need for show. The tavern keeper has seen such scenes 100 times. Some of these deals will be completed before the sun sets. Others will require days of talk, with men returning to the same table each afternoon until all is settled. The tavern becomes a neutral ground, its walls holding the hum of commerce as surely as they hold the warmth of the hearth. By the time the sun dips slightly toward the western side of the street, the meetings begin to wind down. Papers are rolled up and tied with twine, coins are counted and tucked away, and the merchants push back their chairs with the satisfaction of a day's work either done or well begun. A few linger, talking of unrelated matters now, families, weather, and the latest gossip from the capital. The tavern keeper clears away the empty plates, stacking them neatly before taking them to the kitchen. Outside, he can hear the faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the calls of children playing in the lane, and the low chatter of women passing with baskets on their arms. It is a sound that marks the steady rhythm of town life, a rhythm in which the tavern plays a constant, dependable part. As the afternoon edges toward evening, the main room will shift again. Merchants will depart, their chairs soon filled by farmers and townsfolk returning from the day's work. The hum of commerce will give way to the bustle of supper, the soft murmur to a brighter, livelier noise. For now, though, the tavern rests in its role as the merchant's hall, a place where deals are made over warm mugs, where trust is built in quiet corners, and where the day's business is as much a part of the tavern's lifeblood as the ale that fills its kegs. By the time the sun had risen high overhead and begun its slow drift toward the west, the earlier bustle of the tavern had softened into something gentler. The chatter of merchants and travellers had thinned, replaced by the faint creak of wooden beams, settling in the warmth. The air was drowsy, with the mingled scents of roasted meat from the midday meal and the sweet, lingering tang of cider. The main room, once a chorus of clinking mugs and overlapping conversations, now held only a few lingering guests. At one table, an older farmer sat in quiet conversation with the local cooper, their voices low and unhurried. In the corner near the fireplace, a young man bent over a leather-bound ledger, scratching figures in neat columns, while occasionally sipping from a pewter cup. The rest of the long oak tables stood empty, sunlight catching in the small imperfections of their surfaces. Outside, the village itself had settled into its own slow rhythm. The clatter of horses' hooves along the packed dirt road had become infrequent. Here and there, the faint call of a peddler drifted in from the street, carried on the warm afternoon breeze. From the open windows, the tavern keeper could hear the gentle rustling of leaves in the nearby elm trees, their shadows swaying lazily on the ground. This lull between the midday meal and the evening rush was a precious time, though not one of idleness. In the kitchen, the tavern keeper and his helpers moved with practiced efficiency, clearing platters, wiping down counters, and setting bread to rise for the night's supper. A small pot of broth simmered over the hearth, its slow bubbles releasing the comforting aroma of herbs. Upstairs, linens were shaken out and beds smoothed over in the modest guest rooms. The faint scent of lavender, tucked into sachets between sheets, drifted through the narrow hallway. These were the quiet labors that ensured the tavern's reputation remained strong, a place not only of hearty meals and warm fires, but also of comfort for the weary traveller. The tavern keeper himself often used these quieter hours to tend to his books. Sitting at a sturdy desk near the window, he would dip his quill in ink and carefully record the day's sales so far: mugs of ale, plates of venison, loaves of bread, and the occasional jug of imported rum. His script was steady, born from years of keeping careful account, though his thoughts often wandered as he worked. Sometimes in these slow hours there was time for small moments of neighborly kindness. A widow from the edge of town might stop by to exchange news or to leave a basket of eggs as payment for past meals. A young apprentice, on an errand for his master, might pause at the door for a quick mug of cider and a brief respite before returning to his work. These small interactions wove the tavern into the fabric of the village, a place where business, friendship, and hospitality met. By mid-afternoon, the sunlight pouring through the windows took on a softer hue, hinting at the evening to come. The kitchen's preparations became more purposeful. The butcher's delivery would soon arrive, along with a cart from the mill carrying fresh flour for bread. The tavern keeper knew that before long, the benches and tables would again be filled, and the low hum of conversation would rise into a lively chorus. But for now, the stillness was welcome. The fire in the hearth burned low, its embers glowing beneath a thin layer of ash. The air was warm, the light was golden, and the tavern seemed to breathe in slow, steady rhythm, a living thing resting before the next burst of life. By the time the sun dipped low in the western sky, the tavern had already begun to hum with a familiar energy. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the windows, casting long, dappled shadows across the plank floors. Outside, the road was busy again. Wagon wheels clattered, horses snorted, and boots scuffed against the packed earth as travelers arrived from every direction. The air was cooler now, but the smell of warm bread and roasting meat that drifted from the kitchen was enough to quicken the steps of the hungriest guest. Inside, every member of the household moved with practiced precision. Mary had already stoked the hearth to a lively blaze, its heat spilling into the main room and drawing in those seeking comfort. Above the fire, a pot of thick stew simmered gently, steam curling in fragrant tendrils. Thick slices of pork sizzled in a cast-iron skillet, their aroma mingling with that of onions and herbs. The scent alone was enough to make even a weary traveller's stomach growl. Thomas, the young stable boy, darted back and forth between the yard and the taproom, carrying buckets of water for the horses and stacking firewood for the evening ahead. In the corner, Mr. Finch, the tavern's owner, stood near the polished bar, surveying the room. He knew from long experience that the hours between sundown and midnight were the busiest, and they were also the most profitable. This was when locals came in for their ale, merchants struck deals, and travellers shared stories from the road. The first to arrive were a pair of farmers from the nearby countryside. They entered with a gust of cool air, brushing dust from their coats and stamping their boots. "Evening, Mr. Finch," one of them said, offering a grin. In return, Mr. Finch greeted them warmly and poured 2 foaming mugs of cider. Next came a small group of tradesmen from the nearby town, their satchels bulging with papers and goods to sell. They claimed a table near the fire, ordering tankards of ale and plates of hearty fare. Already, the room began to fill with the sound of conversation. Greetings shouted across the room, chairs scraping the floor, and the comforting clink of pewter mugs meeting in a toast. Mary moved gracefully among the tables, balancing platters of bread, roasted carrots, and slices of cheese on one arm, while topping off mugs with the other. She offered polite smiles to strangers and familiar warmth to locals, always remembering who preferred ale to cider and who liked their bread with extra butter. As the evening rush grew, the door opened again and again, each time letting in a gust of night air and a fresh story. A family travelling southward took a corner table, their young children wide-eyed at the lively scene. A lone peddler claimed a spot near the wall, his pack carefully set by his side. From the back of the room, a fiddler began to tune his instrument, preparing to play for coins and supper. By now the tavern had taken on its full evening character. The fire crackled. The fiddler struck up a lively reel. Laughter rolled across the room like a friendly tide. Even the smell seemed richer now. Yeasty bread fresh from the oven, tangy cider, and the faint scent of pipe smoke from the corner where a group of older men exchanged tales of past adventures. Behind the bar, Mr. Finch worked steadily, drawing mugs of ale, cutting wedges of cheese, and keeping one ear tuned to the tone of the room. A tavern keeper's job, he knew, was not just to serve food and drink, but to keep the peace and ensure every guest felt welcome. Now and then he raised his voice above the din, calling out a greeting or reminding Thomas to fetch another keg from the cellar. Mary passed by with another tray, pausing at the fiddler's table to drop a coin in his cap. The children of the travelling family clapped along to the music, their parents smiling forthwith. The first time that long day. 2 merchants, deep in discussion at a nearby table, bent close over a parchment map, their mugs forgotten in front of them. As darkness settled fully outside, the rush reached its peak. Nearly every table was taken. The bar was lined with patrons, and the air was warm with bodies, firelight, and good cheer. From time to time, the door would open to reveal a latecomer stepping in from the chill, blinking against the glow before being swept into the tide of activity. For Mr. Finch, this was the heart of the tavern's life. the moment when strangers became friends over shared meals, when laughter softened the rough edges of the day, and when the taproom's light seemed to promise warmth against the dark world outside. He moved through it all with a steady hand and a knowing smile, just as he had on countless evenings before. The rush would not last forever. Soon enough, the fiddler would play his final tune, the cider barrel would run low, and the night would quiet to the low murmur of lingering guests. But for now, the Colonial Tavern pulsed with life, every creak of the floorboards and clink of a mug, another note in the music of the evening rush. The tavern's great hearth crackled warmly as twilight deepened outside. Shadows stretched long across the plank floor, and the scent of burning oak mingled with the lingering aroma of roasted meat and fresh bread. The bustle of supper had passed, but the tavern was far from quiet. This was the hour for stories, when travelers and locals alike gathered near the fire to share the events of the day, to trade news from distant towns, and, of course, to indulge in a bit of gossip. I moved from table to table, refilling mugs of ale and topping off mugs of steaming cider. The firelight played across familiar faces. Farmers with weathered hands, a couple of merchants still in their coats, and the old cooper who rarely missed an evening. Even strangers, drawn in by the warmth and the hum of voices, seemed to relax once they found a place near the hearth. A thin man in a travel-stained coat began a tale about his journey from Boston, his voice lowering conspiratorially as he hinted at political tensions brewing between the colonies and the crown. Some leaned in, their faces intent, while others kept their gazes steady on their mugs. Politics was a dangerous subject, even in a tavern where free speech was supposed to flow. In the far corner, a pair of young men argued in hushed tones over a disputed card game earlier in the evening. I caught their words only in pieces, accusations of marked cards, feigned innocence, and a whispered dare. I made it my business to stay out of such disputes unless they threatened the peace of the room, but my ears stayed open. A tavern keeper, after all, was a keeper of more than food and drink. I kept the pulse of the town itself. The hearth's warmth seemed to loosen tongues further. Old Thomas, a farmer whose land bordered the river, launched into a retelling of the Great Flood of '72. He exaggerated the height of the waters with each telling, but the laughter that rippled through the room showed no one-minded. Across the table, young Mary Jenkins, who worked in the seamstress shop, whispered to her friend about a marriage proposal she had received and wasn't sure she would accept. I pretended not to hear, but filed it away. Such tidbits had a way of becoming useful. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tavern's shutters, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The door creaked open, and in stepped a man in a heavy cloak, his boots slick with mud. He shook off the cold and cast a quick glance around before taking a seat near the fire. His arrival stirred a fresh wave of curiosity. Newcomers always did. Soon he was speaking in a low, even tone about the roads south, where rumors of bandits and unrest had travelers keeping to larger towns. I poured him a cup of mulled wine and listened without appearing to. A good tavern keeper listened to more than was spoken directly to them. The firelight flickered higher, and the night deepened. The stories grew bolder. Someone told of a ghostly figure seen on the old mill road. Another recounted a fox hunt gone wrong. Bits of gossip wove through it all. A merchant's debt left unpaid, a missing shipment of molasses, a possible new postmaster for the town. None of it confirmed, all of it irresistible. In moments like these, I felt the true purpose of the tavern. It was not merely a place to eat and drink. It was a place where the threads of the community were spun together, strengthened, and sometimes tangled. The fire in the hearth might warm the body, but the stories, the endless flow of tales, news, and whispers, warmed the spirit, keeping the bonds of neighbor and stranger alike alive. As the evening stretched toward night, I moved behind the counter to refill the pitcher of cider, letting the stories wash over me like the steady crackle of the fire. I knew that come morning, half the gossip would be forgotten, a quarter of it disproved, and perhaps a sliver of truth would remain. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was for the comfort of company and the timeless pleasure of a good story told well. The night had deepened into that still, almost secretive hour when the wind outside felt colder and the streets grew quiet, save for the muffled crunch of boots on frozen ground. Inside the tavern, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the lingering tang of ale. The candles had burned low, their wax pooling on the tables, and the great hearth glowed a deep orange, crackling every so often as a log split in the heat. By now, most of the day's respectable guests had taken to their rooms upstairs, seeking warmth under heavy quilts. The ones who remained were of a different breed, the night wanderers, the restless souls, and those who found comfort in the company of strangers after the sun had gone. This was the late-night crowd. At a corner table, two sailors leaned in close, their voices low but urgent. One had a weathered face. At sea, his eyes darting toward the door, as if expecting someone to enter at any moment. The other laughed quietly, shaking his head, and reached for his mug. Near the hearth sat an older man with a long clay pipe. The stem clamped gently between his teeth. He wasn't talking much, but his eyes seemed to miss nothing. The firelight caught the silver threads in his hair, and every now and then he would draw in a slow breath from his pipe and release a ribbon of smoke that curled lazily upward toward the ceiling beams. In another corner, a card game was underway, the clink of coins punctuating bursts of laughter. The players, half hidden in shadow, leaned over the table like conspirators. Every so often, one would slam a card down with exaggerated flair, setting off groans from the others. The barkeep kept a discreet eye on them from behind the counter, his rag pausing mid-wipe whenever voices rose just a little too loud. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of night air that made the candles flicker. A man in a dark cloak stepped inside, stamping the cold from his boots. He carried himself with the posture of someone accustomed to watching his back. No one asked where he came from or why he was traveling at such an hour. Questions were a rare commodity in the tavern this late. The barkeep nodded toward an empty stool, and the stranger made his way over, his face half hidden beneath his hood. As the hour grew later, the mood in the tavern shifted. The noise softened to a steady murmur, the fire's crackle the loudest sound. Some guests sat alone, lost in thought, their mugs untouched for minutes at a time. Others spoke in quiet tones about business ventures, whispered rumors, or private troubles they would not dare voice in daylight. The tavern, in these hours, became more than a place to eat and drink. It was a confessional, a refuge, and sometimes a hiding place. The barkeep moved from table to table, topping off mugs with ale or cider, offering a slice of leftover pie to those who looked like they needed something warm. He spoke little, but his presence was steady, like the low hum of the fire. He knew that at this time of night, people valued a listening ear more than a conversation. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. A loose sign swung on its iron bracket with a slow creak. Inside, the warmth seemed to grow heavier, lulling some guests into that drowsy half-state where the mind wanders. A few rested their heads on folded arms at the tables, their breathing slow and even. In the corner by the window, a young man scribbled in a worn notebook by candlelight. His eyes darted to the others in the room, studying their faces, before his quill scratched more words onto the page. Perhaps he was a poet, or perhaps a journalist, chronicling the stories of the night for some unseen audience. No one disturbed him. As the hour neared midnight, the crowd began to thin. One by one, travelers made their way up the narrow stairs, their footsteps soft on the wooden boards. Those who stayed lingered in small clusters, reluctant to step back into the cold. The barkeep quietly banked the fire, pushing the embers together so they would last until morning. In the far corner, the card game reached its final hand. The winner, grinning through crooked teeth, gathered his coins with a slow sweep, as though savoring the moment. His companions groaned, but shook his hand before rising to leave. Soon, only a handful of guests remained, their voices blending into the low hum of the night. Outside, the moon slipped behind a cloud, and the darkness grew deeper still. The tavern's wooden beams creaked softly, as if settling into sleep. The barkeep poured himself a small cup of cider, leaning against the counter for a rare moment of stillness. The late-night crowd, like the tide, would the tide. Would the night crowd, like the tide, would the tide, always come and go. But for now, in the glow of the embers and the quiet companionship of those who remained, the tavern felt like the safest place in the world. The air inside the tavern has softened now, the thick hum of voices reduced to a few lingering murmurs. Outside, the night has wrapped the small colonial town in silence, save for the distant creak of a cartwheel or the occasional bark of a dog. Inside, the candles have burned low, their wax pooling at the base and their flames flickering with each draught from the old timber door. The last of the patrons sit hunched over their mugs, savoring the dregs as if reluctant to face the cool air beyond the tavern walls. One man, a regular from the village, swirls the last of his ale slowly, listening as the innkeeper offers a few parting words. Another guest, a traveller staying the night upstairs, leans back in his chair, yawning after a long day's ride. The smell of roasted meat and spiced cider still hangs in the air, though now it mingles with the fainter scent of extinguished pipe tobacco. The floor, once lively with the shuffle of boots, is quiet. Save for the occasional creak of the oak planks, the innkeeper moves through the room with steady purpose, gathering empty mugs and plates, stacking them carefully so as not to disturb those finishing their drinks. The clink of pottery and pewter carries through the stillness, a gentle rhythm to mark the end of the night. Near the hearth, the fire has burned down to glowing embers, their orange light casting long, sleepy shadows on the walls. A log collapses inward with a soft hiss, sending a final puff of sparks upward before settling into its bed of ash. One of the serving girls, her apron smudged from the day's work, kneels to stir the embers and lay a fresh log atop them, ensuring a warm welcome for anyone who rises before dawn. The conversation, what little remains of it, has taken on a slow, reflective quality. Instead of tales told for laughter or debate, the talk now drifts toward farewells. Safe travels, good rest, and promises to return. The tavern has a way of drawing people back, as much for the warmth of the fire as for the comfort of familiar company. At last, the innkeeper steps to the center of the room and, in a voice warm but firm, announces that it is time to close. The words are met with nods and quiet chuckles, for everyone knows the routine by heart. Chairs scrape softly against the floor as the last patrons stand, slipping on their coats and hats. A few coins clink into the innkeeper's hand, accompanied by murmured thanks. The door opens and closes several times, each time letting in a brief breath of cold night air. The sound of boots on the porch fades into the distance, leaving the tavern nearly empty. Upstairs, the floorboards creak as overnight guests make their way to their rooms, the flicker of candlelight trailing after them. Downstairs, the serving staff begins the final round of tidying. The tables are wiped, the mugs washed in warm soapy water, the floor swept clean of crumbs and stray straw. The soft swish of the broom blends with the gentle slosh of water in the washing tub. The innkeeper pauses a moment by the bar, leaning on its polished surface. He looks out across the quiet room, the firelight glinting off the brass fixtures and the rows of bottles behind him. This is the part of the day he likes best, the stillness after the bustle, when the tavern seems to exhale and rest. One by one, the candles are snuffed out, their thin trails of smoke curling into the air. The room grows dim, the last light coming from the fire, now little more than a warm glow. The front door is bolted with a solid, satisfying click. Outside, the night is deep and still. Inside, the tavern sleeps, holding in its walls the echoes of laughter, the low hum of conversation, and the comforting scent of hearth, smoke, and ale. Tomorrow will bring another day, more travelers to welcome, more stories to hear. But for now, the Colonial Tavern rests under the quiet watch of the stars. Amiu, Eus, Dolby, and O.